The Korean War, a face-off for control of the Asian peninsula. For most of its history, the Korean peninsula had been ruled by a series of dynastic rulers, although the Chinese saw it as their sphere of influence starting in the late 1500s. The Japanese, however, had always coveted the region and tried unsuccessfully many times to capture it. When the Japanese defeated China in 1896 and then Russia in 1905, they were able to realize their dream and began the process of annexing the peninsula to Japan. In the build-up to what would become World War II, the Japanese made the teaching of the Korean language, literature, and culture illegal and forced many Koreans to fight for the Japanese during the war. The Soviet Union invaded Korea from the north at the end of World War II, occupying the area on August 10, 1945, the day after the U.S. nuclear attack on Nagasaki. They continued their march south to the 38th parallel, where they stopped and waited for the United States to move from the south to reach them. The sides agreed to control their areas of the peninsula until a more formal agreement could be reached. Elections were held in May of 1948 in South Korea, which the Soviets opposed, leading to the choice of Syngman Rhee as president with the support of the United States. Rhee worked to expel all communists from the country. These communists headed north, where they believed they would receive support. On August 15, 1948, the Republic of Korea was formed in South Korea, and almost immediately the Soviet Union helped to create the People's Republic of Korea in North Korea under the leadership of Kim Il-sung. Both Korean leaders had hopes of reuniting all of Korea under their control, and when the Soviet Union removed itself from the peninsula in 1948, with the United States following in 1949, the door was open to do just that. Unfortunately for Rhee and the people of South Korea, the Soviet Union and the Communist Chinese had left North Korea in a far better position militarily, a position that both groups enhanced into 1950. Kim Il-sung played the diplomatic game quite well in early 1950 and convinced United Nations inspectors that no invasion was going to happen. The United Nations could not have been more wrong, as Kim sent the Korean People's Army, the KPA, across the 38th parallel at dawn on June 25, 1950, pushing a completely unprepared South Korean army scrambling in retreat further and further south. Almost immediately, the United Nations issued a call for support for the South Koreans, with the United States answering the call by sending air and sea forces to the region. They were able to do this because the Soviet Union had walked out of the Security Council meetings and their veto power with them because they were upset that Communist China had not been allowed to take China's permanent seat on the Council. The UN's support did little good, however, as by August the KPA had forced South Korean forces and supporting US troops to a perimeter around the city of Busan, the southeastern point of the peninsula, and almost off the peninsula altogether. At this point, U.S. General Douglas MacArthur launched one of the most dangerous water landings in history at the South Korean port of Incheon, very close to the South Korean capital of Seoul and the 38th parallel. When the North Korean troops realized that their supply lines were going to be cut, they quickly retreated and were almost as quickly forced above the 38th parallel. On October 19, 1950, United Nations forces had moved far enough north to capture the North Korean capital of Pyongyang. As the North Koreans were retreating, MacArthur realized that if he pushed hard enough, maybe the communists could be driven off the peninsula the other way. Pushing the North Korean forces closer to the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China, scared Mao Zedong, the communist leader of China, that United Nations forces would continue their attack into China and try to force him from power. On October 25, 1950, the Chinese sent in their first wave of reinforcements to aid the North Koreans, followed by a second wave a month later. By the end of 1950, the UN forces had been forced to retreat back to the 38th parallel. Over the next 2.5 years, battle lines moved back and forth around the 38th parallel, with both sides forcing the front to shift north and south. By July 1953, an armistice was reached that served as a ceasefire in the war. To this day, no formal peace treaty has been signed in what U.S. President Harry Truman originally called a police action. The peninsula remains divided, with a 160-mile long and 2.5-mile wide demilitarized zone remaining between the two nations.